This is my unrepairable Kia Ceed GT. And so far I have fixed everything that is wrong with this car except this.
A misfire. Ever since I got my hands on this car, it has had a misfire on cold start. And for over a month now, I've been diagnosing, testing and even replacing parts in hopes to get to the bottom of why it does that.
And after many sleepless nights, I still haven't fixed it.
But now I'm going to have one last attempt at trying to repair this fault myself, and if I can't do it, I'm going to have to take this car to the main dealer for them to diagnose it themselves.
But before that, I've got a few more parts to check and a few more theories to test.
And I'm really hoping this car is fixable because my end goal is to swap it on in hopes of one day swapping my way up to owning a supercar.
Okay, I think one thing that we should do, instead of keep chucking parts at this car and wasting that little bit of money, is actually dive into something that we haven't checked so far.
And that is what is in control of all of this engine. I'm talking about the ECU. We could change every single sensor, every coil, every spark plug, every vacuum, everything to do with this engine, but if at the end of it this ECU is commanding that the car overfuels on cold start, it wouldn't matter. So I think we should remove this ECU and actually get it checked out.
And of course, the only place I'm going to be taking the ECU is ECU testing. So let's get this ECU out, and at least if there's nothing wrong with it, we can tick that off the list.
And to get to this ECU, all I've got to do first is remove the battery. So I'm going to take the battery clamp off, then remove the terminals and get this battery out of the way. Now that's out the way, we can remove the two 10mm bolts and then start unplugging the ECU from the wiring harness.
Boom.
I found it way easier just to remove the entire bracket holding in the ECU instead of actually taking it from the bracket itself.
And now I can head over to ECU testing, where I'm going to leave this with them over the weekend so they can thoroughly check if there is any faults.
So now ECU testing are going to do a manual electronic test of the affected circuits and determine whether there is a fault with my ECU. Once they've done that, they can now rebuild all the components so we can definitely rule out if my ECU has a problem or not. And after a couple of days, it was time to go and collect my ECU and find out the good or bad news.
Well, we've got the ECU back, and of course, they couldn't find any fault with it itself. That doesn't actually mean that this still wasn't the issue. There is a chance that I could plug this back into the car, turn the car on, and it solve itself. Something as little as just having everything internally refreshed could actually solve the problem. But we're not going to know until I get it back on the car. So let's plug it back in and see what happens.
And so while I'm getting this ECU back on the car, I just want to give a massive thank you to ECU Testing for getting my unit in so fast and giving me the results that I wanted to hear. I'll leave a link to them on the screen now in the top right corner, and also any links in the description for if you want to check them out yourselves and get any of your modules or controls actually diagnosed. From ECUs to ABS pumps, they can literally diagnose any problem.
One battery and ECU back on. Well, it's definitely worth a try. So let's turn it on and let's see what it actually does. Now, like I say, they didn't actually find a fault, so I'm assuming it is still going to misfire. Okay, weirdly, even though this car has been sat for 3 days, absolutely untouched, that was nowhere near as bad as it used to be. I can tell because the boost gauge and the turbo gauge on the dashboard fluctuates a lot. Well, it used to, and then it wasn't doing it as much. But that is not to say that that is normal yet. So I've got a few more things to actually try. But before I crack on with anything else, I think it's going to be a long night, so I could do with a little energy boost. And the last thing I want to be doing right now is disturbing my work pattern and having to go out and buy a horrible, nasty energy drink. But luckily for me, I have got a healthy alternative. This is Holy, which, if you didn't already know, is a healthier, more tasty alternative to your energy and soft drinks. Now currently I am actually drinking one of their new energy flavours, but if you haven't tried Holy for yourself, you can actually get the sample pack, which comes with some of their best energy, iced tea and also hydration flavours. And luckily for you guys, right now is a perfect time to try Holy yourself, because it is currently the Black Week sales. So you can actually get your hands on a Holy starter kit including all their favourite flavours for £10 off, and plus an extra £5 if you use my discount code on the screen. That's a £15 saving. And if you actually place that order from the 24th of November to the 2nd of December, you will automatically be entered into winning a PlayStation 5. So what are you waiting for? You can literally save money while putting better ingredients into your body with Holy. Now, let's get back to this kit.
But for now, I think the best thing to do is actually sit down and do as much research as I can and try and speak to as many people that know quite a bit about these particular engines.
Okay, so over the past few days, I have been seriously trying to educate myself on how this car actually works, just so I can break it down and find out a little bit more about where the problem is actually coming from. And what I have found out is that these cars run on something called an open loop when you first turn them on. Let me explain.
Open loop is something a car does when you first initially turn it on from cold to get all the components up to temperature. In open loop, the car won't actually send any information back to the ECU so it can determine the air and fuel ratio. Instead, it will keep repeating the same process of command input, control signal and output. Whereas as closed loop, once the command, control and output have been determined, it will actually send feedback back to the controller, therefore being able to adjust and determine how much air and fuel to mix into the car. So essentially the car will carry on doing what it is doing and the ECU will have no clue that it's actually doing anything wrong until it goes into closed loop. But to get into closed loop, the car has to get to a certain temperature so that the O2 sensor can send a signal to the engine control module. So essentially, until that O2 sensor down the back just before the catalytic converter is up to temperature, this car uses the two map sensors and the coolant temperature sensor to adjust fueling and calculate how much fuel it needs to put in to keep it alive. And with my misfire only happening when open loop is active, that would mean that there is something maybe wrong with either both of their map sensors or the coolant temperature sensor. Quite a while ago, I have actually tried unplugging both the map sensors one at a time and both at the same time just to see if anything changes, and it just runs like absolute garbage. But one thing that I haven't checked this entire time is the coolant temperature sensor, simply because I didn't actually realise that it used that to fuel on cold start. So if I plug in my trusty old X-Tool diagnostic machine, turn the ignition on, what I want to be looking at on the live data is what the coolant temperature sensor is actually reading, because if the coolant temperature sensor is thinking that it is a lot colder outside than it actually is, it's going to overfuel to compensate for how cold the temperature is. Now, we already know that the ambient temperature sensor is working fine because that is currently reading -1, and it's definitely -1. So what I want to be looking for on the scan tool is the coolant temperature sensor and see if it matches up with what the ambient temperature is saying. So if I simply engine coolant temperature, here we go. We have got 1 degree, which is pretty much the same. Okay, I was hoping that that was going to be a little bit different, but I think what we should do for science sake is actually unplug that coolant temperature sensor and start the car, because if this car is using the 2 map sensors that we know are all good and that coolant temperature sensor to fuel this car in open loop, then at least we can eliminate that is the issue. So
let's unplug it.
On this car, the coolant temperature sensor is located just next to the thermostat housing, which is underneath the intake pipe. Luckily, it's not that bad to get to, so I can get it unplugged and we can test this theory.
So now, if we head over to the live data, that should be reading -40, which of course just means that it isn't connected. So let's just see what happens if we turn this car on. It's not misfiring. It's actually not misfiring. It is absolutely fine. No way. It is not misfiring at all. And that is a proper cold start. Oh my God. Wait, why though? Because it should be reading correct. Oh my God, that's not misfiring. Why is that not misfiring? That don't make any sense. I actually think we're getting close to fixing this car. That is the first time since I've owned this thing that I've unplugged something and it has actually made a difference. Everything else that I've left unplugged, it still misfires and you can still tell that there is an issue. But with that coolant temperature sensor completely unplugged, it doesn't misfire at all. I'm going to have to try and do some more research, because if that is all it's going to be, then I'll eat my hat.
Now, after doing some research, I found out that there is a chance that because that coolant temperature sensor is unplugged, it is just going into a safe mode, which you'd think would overfuel, but it's not, and it isn't misfiring. So I've got something I want to try.
I think what I should do is actually unplug the coolant temperature sensor, start the car. Obviously, I'm assuming it's not going to misfire, but then what I'm going to do is plug the coolant temperature sensor back in and see if it actually misfires. So, well, let's give that a go. It's worth a shot.
I'm not sure at this point whether this will make any difference or not, but it's worth a try. With the coolant temperature sensor being unplugged, this car currently doesn't misfire, so I've got to eliminate everything.
So this shouldn't now misfire. Which it isn't. That is ticking over absolutely fine. So now, well, that's now plugged back in, and it's almost like we've bypassed the misfire. So now that coolant temp sensor is plugged back in. No misfiring at all. I'm getting close. I think I'm getting close. I've got a feeling it's something to do with that coolant temperature sensor, because that's literally just bypassed all the misfiring.
But with it getting really late and cold, I decided to call it a night, and the next morning I came out and wanted to test this theory one more time just to make sure we are 100% getting a cold start.
Okay, that coolant temperature sensor is definitely unplugged, because on the live data we are reading -40. So I've left it half plugged in. I'm going to turn the car on so we get a 100% cold start, and then I'm going to plug it back in and see if it actually works on the live data and if the engine actually does anything different. Right, let's turn the car on. No misfiring at all, literally perfect. Okay, no misfiring at all. Let me plug it. And now it's plugged back in and there's no misfiring. Oh wait. Wait. No misfiring at all. Literally none at all. So pretty much, if we bypass that coolant temperature sensor, this car does not misfire one bit. That is very interesting. Let's just go get another coolant temperature sensor and see what happens. I can't really explain this one, but if it's a dodgy sensor, then, well, that's been the problem all along. So let's try it. And just like that, thanks to Motorstop, we now have another coolant temperature sensor. We did have another one, but it actually broke, so we had to wait for another one to be delivered, hence why it is now evening time. So there's no actual kind of reason as to why this should work, because the old one wasn't working when it was plugged in, but the car didn't misfire when it was unplugged. But we've got one now, so we might as well change it.
Luckily, this part was only around £10, so it's not going to break the bank, and I definitely think it's worth just changing it for the chance that it could actually make a difference. So I'm going to get everything tucked back off the car so I can get to that coolant temperature sensor, get the old one off and install the new one.
Okay, that coolant temperature sensor is now plugged in. I've got it in as far as I can go, but it doesn't seem to like the new thread. But it's in, and it is in fact working. As we can see on the live data, it is currently reading at 2 degrees Celsius. I'm using this tool because my other one's on charge. But should we start it?
And shortly after starting the car, things started to go from bad to worse. It started doing something that it's not done so far that is very worrying.
It's misfiring loads, like way worse than it's ever done it before. Oh my god. Oh my god, that stinks of egg. Oh my god. That literally stinks like raw egg. Imagine if it's been the catalytic converter this entire time. I mean, the car's pretty much dying. The engine light is flashing. Yeah, the car's literally oh my god, that stinks. Oh my god, that is awful. That literally smells like someone's just give me a minute. That literally smells like someone has just let one of them stink fart bombs off that you used to get in school. The cat's blocked. The cat's knackered. Imagine after all this time, I was about to just kind of give up, and it's just gave me that sign that the cat's knackered. Right, I'm going to get the O2 sensor out, get my borescope out and actually look at the catalytic converter from the top. Let's do it. I can't believe that has just happened.
But one thing I realised before I was actually going to dive into looking at the catalytic converter is the only thing I've changed since is that coolant temperature sensor. So I'm going to get it unplugged once again and see if the car continues to misfire. If it does, then we know that it's nothing to do with that coolant temperature sensor.
Now I've got to be honest, I'm hoping that this now misfires, because then we know it's nothing to do with that temperature sensor. Okay, it's misfiring, so it is nothing at all to do with that temperature sensor. Guys, we literally could have a blocked cat. That hasn't been checked. That is something that has not been checked yet. And the rear O2 sensor is actually mapped out. So there would have been no way of kind of telling me that that was happening. Wow, we literally could just have a blocked cat, and that is why this has been misfiring the entire time. Let's get that pre-cat O2 sensor out and actually inspect it for ourselves.
And I think in situations like this, I've just got to be a little bit thankful that everything on this engine is pretty easy to work on and easily accessible. Everything that I've tried is really easy to get to, and I've just got to thank myself that it isn't a more complex engine. But I can get this O2 sensor out, get my bore scope in, and see what it actually looks like.
Okay, this is a little bit awkward because I can't actually see what I'm aiming at, but this is where we want to be. Okay, let me try and twist. I mean, that looks, does that look okay? But is that blocked? I don't actually, is that like a hole? Or is that the shadow of the camera like you say? I think it's the shadow of the camera, innit? But that does look blocked, doesn't it? Tell you what I'll do, I'll take a picture of that and a video. I mean, if the catalytic converter is blocked, this has been our literal problem the entire time. That's interesting actually. But the time is currently 11 o'clock at night, it is very cold, so I think we should carry on with this in the morning. But we're getting somewhere now. The car's actually talking back to us. It's saying I stink and I've got an engine light with misfire codes, so we're actually making it hiccup more. So we're getting somewhere. We're definitely getting somewhere. Okay, I've just got off the phone with the third Kia Master Tech that I have actually been in contact with over the issue with this car, and all three of them Kia Master Techs are all saying the same exact thing, and that is something that I haven't actually considered while trying to diagnose this problem. And I will get to that a little bit later in the video, because now I've got to tackle this problem of why the car is smoking and misfiring completely. This time the car is misfiring and the car actually knows it's misfiring because we've got engine lights and fault codes. Them fault codes now are a P0300, a P0301 and a P0302. They are for random / multiple cylinder misfires detected, and then a cylinder 1 and cylinder 2 misfire. They are currently active. And before, when we thought that this car had the issue, the car actually didn't throw any engine lights, any fault codes, and also there was no misfire counts on the live data. But now I've got to get to the bottom of this problem before I can move on to actually telling you guys why this car runs rough on cold.
And I think a great place to start is just putting everything back together and resetting all the adaptive values on the car itself.
Now everything is literally back together and how it was. I'm going to simply just delete all of these fault codes off the system and pretty much start again, because I need to get to the bottom of why it is now actually misfiring and it stinks out of the exhaust. So I guess the first thing to do is clear the fault codes, turn it on and actually see what it does. So engine control module, diagnose, read fault codes, there they are, and we will clear all them fault codes. So fault codes are cleared and we have got everything on the live data, and the battery's dead. Okay, so it's still really lumpy. Yeah, something is not right at all. The engine warning light is now flashing once again. The car's literally choking itself out. and we've got them same exact misfire codes. And it stinks. What is going on, man? We have definitely got a pretty big problem on our hands. It was barely even keeping itself alive. It was as if someone had their hand over the intake pipe and the car literally couldn't breathe. It stinks like rotten eggs and it is smoking a lot. I've got to now diagnose another problem to get to the other problem. This is an absolute nightmare. This car has been an absolute headache. I just appreciate that you guys are enjoying the stress through the camera, but I'm still smiling. We are going to get to the bottom of this. I've just got to figure out now why that is doing what it is doing.
So something I'm going to do now is actually try and monitor where the misfire is coming from. If it's only on a few certain cylinders, then it may be something to do with spark plugs or coil pack and might not actually be the catalytic converter anyway. So I'm going to check the live data once again, to which I found that cylinder number 4 was the main culprit of this misfire.
Okay, with that misfire only coming from cylinder 4, I guess it makes sense to just take the coil and plug out and just see if there's anything we can visually kind of check. Apart from being black and it not being very tight in the cylinder, I don't think there's anything wrong with that spark plug, but I think it's definitely worth eliminating it by simply just changing it over to, let's go, cylinder 1. So it's the complete opposite end of the engine.
And what I'm trying to find out by doing this is if the cylinder misfire moves from cylinder 4 to cylinder 1, then we know that it is something to do with that spark plug or coil.
Okay, coil 4 and spark plug 4 are now swapped over with coil 1 and spark plug 1. Let's turn it back on, read the live data and see if that misfire has changed cylinders. This is going to be very interesting. Well, it's definitely misfiring again. Live data. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we're now on all cylinders misfiring, and there's that engine light again. So it's literally now all cylinders, and there is no throttle at all anymore. Right. Well, that's brilliant. What in the world is going on now? There's no raw egg smell anymore. That's just gone on its own accord. That is just completely gone with no trace. I don't know what the fault codes are going to be. So we've got misfires on literally all cylinders now, every single one, well except number 3, but that was definitely misfiring on the live data. Right, we've got a whole different issue on our hands now, and maybe solving this issue might solve the original issue of what was wrong with this car. But it's weird now how it's throwing engine lights, and this car won't drive now. Like, there was no throttle whatsoever. If I turn it back on, it is almost dying. Like, it is trying, look, it is trying so hard to keep itself alive, but it's as if it just doesn't know what it's doing. Let me clear faults, and I'm just going to reset all the adaptive values and see if that makes any difference. No. It is still pretty much dying. What in the world is going on?
But with that misfire now being on every single cylinder and the rotten egg smell actually disappearing, there's only one thing that I can actually check, because luckily I kept the spark plugs from when we swapped them for the NGK ones. So as a bit of luck, I might just swap these round and see what happens.
I don't know whether it's going to make a difference, but with it pretty much being on all 4 cylinders, I've now swapped the spark plugs over to the old ones, which we know weren't the cause in the first place. So let's just see if that has made any sort of difference. It actually has. It's actually gone back to how it used to be. Just a little bit rough on idle. So the NGK spark plugs that I paid 50 quid for are wrong. They were the wrong spark plugs all along. Let me just turn it back on. Absolutely fine. Literally spot on. Absolutely fine. No problems whatsoever. And there is quite literally no misfires at all. Literally none. Everything else is reading and there are no misfires at all. Hold on, let me work this out. So we put them NGK spark plugs in the last video and it was running absolutely fine. Like, it'd still do the rough idle, but then it would run fine. Since changing that coolant temperature sensor, it literally was smelling like rotten eggs. It wouldn't barely even rev. It was completely out of sync, as if like the timing chain had snapped. We've put the Bosch ones back in and it's not misfiring. Someone, please explain that. The only thing is they are wrong, but they didn't detect it. What? I've literally driven this car with the NGK spark plugs in. That does make 0 sense. That literally makes no sense whatsoever. My mind is blown. Well, I think we can all agree that I have gave it my all in trying to get to the bottom of why this car runs really rough on cold start. And after everything I have changed and spent money, time and effort on, I'm no further in with this car. It still runs rough on cold start, but doesn't actually misfire, and I just can't get to the bottom of why it does that. So I think sometimes in life you have to admit defeat and seek help from the people that know these cars best. And with that being said, I think the fate of this car is I simply take it back to where it came from. And no, I'm not talking about Calvin, I'm talking about Kia themselves. I want to take it there because if they can't diagnose it and get to the bottom of it, then I guess no one can.
So that is exactly where I'm going to be heading, straight to the Kia dealership in hopes of actually getting some answers as to what is going on with this car.
Right, we are currently at Kia main dealer, apparently the UK's leading dealer. Let's see what they've got to say.
And of course, I'm not going to put anyone's faces on camera, but what the woman at the service desk had to say is definitely interesting.
Yes. It's here now, is it? Yeah. It might be normal. Really?
Might be. Some of them, if they have a double exhaust, they do.
Like pop
Pop.
and... Yeah, that's
Yes.
exactly how it is. Really?
some of them are, if they don't have it, they don't do it. Certain ones
Yeah.
do that. But
It
I'm
literally
not
like
sure
backfires.
about- Yeah.
Yeah.
Pop, like,
Yeah, exactly. As if it's like tuned to do that.
yes.
Yeah, as if it's programmed to do it.
Yeah.
And after speaking to the really helpful woman on the service desk, she was explaining that it's normally the newer model blue coloured Kia Ceed GTs that actually have a really rough idle and sound like they're popping and banging on cold start. And with my car having an engine swap, maybe, just maybe, the engine is from a blue car. I'm not sure what the colour would have to make a difference on, but that is what I've got told, and I'm pretty sure that what my car is doing is actually normal. And something worth noting that the 3 Kia Master Techs that I've spoke to outside of Kia have also said that while this isn't common, it is very normal for these kind of cars to actually run really rough on cold start. So I guess I've been trying to diagnose a problem that never even existed.
Well, that is very interesting, because after speaking to the lady in there, she also said that it is very common for these cars to do that, somewhat normal. But unfortunately, they can't book me in until the 19th of December, which I can't really go without content until then. So I guess I'm going to have to look at other options of what to do with this car. But for now, if you did enjoy this video, please like, comment and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
You wear a hat they call dad. Me, I'm the dad in a hat. You just like clubbing and clothes. Me, I like afternoon naps. 3, I be missed for the road. My oldest like counting racks. My middle one, she's in a dirt bike. My youngest is just like a mama. The mama loves me and I love her, so if she wants something, it's never a bother. 3 to the ladies.